there's no evidence of any protected single-sex spaces anywhere in the UK.
Hi, I'm Jane.
Hi, I'm Mary from Seen in Health.
And I'm Fiona, a citizen journalist.
And I'm Bex.
And we are
Insightful Sisters.
So, hi everybody. We're really lucky tonight. We're looking forward to this episode. Lots of us do things like write emails, do letters, and we sometimes wonder of the worth of doing those. Well, tonight we're going to talk to Fiona and Mary, who've been working on an amazing project that's pulled together the work of an awful lot of women, and I think will go on to have consequences going forward as well. So I'm going to pass straight across to Bex, and she's going to introduce you to Fiona and Mary.
Hi, both. Thank you so much for being here. So the best place to start is by talking about yourself. So this project began, Fiona, with yourself and another group of women that you had met mostly on Mumsnet. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, I'll start by saying that I'm not part of Seen in Health, and all views are my own because they're a staff network and they've got sort of various rules they have to apply by, and I'm sort of sitting outside that organisation, and I'm not involved in healthcare at all, and I've never been involved in any sort of organised feminism, and until last year I didn't even know the phrase gender critical because I relied entirely on the BBC and The Guardian for my news. It all started one morning back in February last year when I was having a break from work, having a coffee. I clicked on Mumsnet, active threads. I saw a thread up near the top called Sandy Peggy versus NHS Fife, and it was sort of a local interest. I saw Fife, I clicked through, and I just couldn't believe what I was reading. I mean, it blew my mind. I sort of shot through it over the course of 2 or 3 days. I mean, some people talk about peaking over months. I just shot to the top of the mountain on some sort of express cable car. I had total altitude sickness. It was really quite discombobulating. And I just went through all the stages, disbelief. I was just watching what these women were writing and thinking, well, I mean, I think, no, really, that can't be happening. And then, okay, it is happening. So it must be a mistake. It'll be fine. It'll get all sorted out. It's a misunderstanding and it'll all be sorted out. And then it's not a mistake. Okay, so this is happening and it's not a mistake. How is this happening? And how didn't I find out about it? How didn't I know this is happening? And then I got quite angry, especially at the BBC, feeling a bit betrayed. And then I just ended up really anxious and feeling really helpless about it. I really had to do something to help my own upset. And yeah, one thing led to another. And I ended up coordinating an audit of single-sex policies for all NHS trusts across all 4 nations. So that's over 300 trusts. A huge project, all run by volunteers and completed in 6 months. So it was a bit of a whistle-stop tour. And then after we got all this completely unwieldy information, we realised we had to kind of make it more accessible. And with an amazing, amazing sort of core team of 6 women, big shout out to them because it wouldn't have happened otherwise. It's all now available in the form of an interactive map and on the Seen in Health website.
That's great. I was looking at the map earlier today. I just think it's such a good tool. So Seen in Health has come into the story there. Mary, can you tell us about your own background? How did you come to be part of Seen in Health and how did you become part of this project?
Yes, so I would say that I peaked probably in about 2020, not dissimilar to quite a lot of other people. It was around sports that first, made me notice Leah Thomas. We can thank for that one. And then that started the process, probably not as fast as Fiona, but started the process of me seeing more and more, reading more and more. Then I ended up being on X. I then joined a women's group called the Women of Wessex, which then was another kind of stepping stone to start, mixing with other people that felt the same and wanted to organise and do things. And then as an NHS employee, Seen in Health started 2 years ago. So I joined first of all just for the newsletter, and then I was really looking, wanting to do actually some more and think about how I could actually, be actually making a change and seeing what we could do to hold people to account with regards to how things were. So from the perspective of Seen in Health, obviously, we've had the issues with Sandy Peggy and the Darlington nurses. Also, we've got the issues around language and the removal of the word woman and all those kind of things. As a staff group, that's what we're interested in. We're interested in those issues that are related to the protected sex characteristics and also speaking up on behalf of staff and patients. From our perspective, I was asked to look at policy stuff I would probably say about 2 months before Fiona and her team's work we was put in touch by Sex Matters, and I was hoping to do something similar to what Fiona and her team had done, but what a gift to actually have that team to have done that and then looking at their stuff. So Fiona and the team also, I should say, wrote an absolutely brilliant audit report of it all. I mean, we're talking really high quality stuff here, so after reading that and seeing what they were done, we really wanted to work in partnership with them, house obviously that interactive map that they've developed, and we have actively been really using the evidence that they've found. For those of you that have seen it on X, we've actually been publishing on there, trying to go through all of the hospitals and show their policies and how they're unlawful.
That's amazing. It's such a good piece of work and so comprehensive. So there've been, as you've sort of mentioned there, a lot of high-profile cases challenging the NHS around lack of single-sex provisions and around the erasure of sex-based language. What sort of impact is this having on health professionals and patients?
So the main concerns that we're trying to address is these policies obviously mean, from what we've seen and from what the audit shows, is that none of the policies actually protect the sex characteristic in the sense of protecting single-sex facilities for staff or patients. And what does that mean from the perspective of a patient? Well, it means that, when they come into hospital, that from the perspective of they're supposed to provide single-sex accommodation, that they use the word gender instead of sex, which obviously muddies the water. Because when we talk about sex, that means biological males that may identify as women are being put on female wards. And a lot of that time, it's about self-ID as well, which we don't have in the UK. So a lot of the policies show that. We've got the issues around staffing as well, same problem. I don't know, Fiona, you probably got some comments about some of the things that you found in the audit as well. I don't know if you want to comment on those.
Yes, I mean, I think one of the issues is that it's just not transparent. We know from Sandy Peggy's case, it's not transparent for staff either because there aren't written down policies; they're just practices. But from the patient point of view, there is a public sector duty that says that the NHS is obliged to make sure they don't cause any conflicts between groups. And I would personally think that, no one likes surprises, do they? And so tucking all of these things away, I mean, I would say I call it kind of hidden in plain sight, really, because on the one hand, we are being advertised as single-sex spaces and the elimination of mixed-sex accommodation. I'll read you out something from the NHS Constitution, because I think it's really useful to actually hear the words. So this is from 2019, and if the average person in the street goes and reads this, you'll think it's all fine. Patients should not normally have to share sleeping accommodation with members of the opposite sex. Patients should not have to share toilet or bathroom facilities with members of the opposite sex. Patients should not have to walk through an area occupied by patients of the opposite sex to reach toilets or bathrooms, and this excludes corridors. And women-only day rooms should be provided in mental health inpatient. I think they mean units, but there's not the word on the end. And, for most people, that's absolutely clear. Or it should be clear, shouldn't it? But actually, because of this strange change of language, all the people who've kind of had the Stonewall training, they use different language to kind of mean different things. I mean, it's not just Stonewall. I think there's NHS Rainbow Badges. There are lots of organisations who do the same thing, and there's a mixing up of sex and gender. And what we found when we were reading these policies, we're completely naive to it all, really. You're trying to understand what they're saying. And even if you can get hold of one of these policies, because they're not easy to get hold of, even reading them, it's still difficult to understand their meaning because they're opposite. And from 2009, this was when gender self-ID was first, I think, well, it was brought out, but it was in the back of a document called single-sex accommodation. So the headline is saying one thing, but tucked in the back of this document, you've got to be a really persistent reader. It's not referred to in the index. It's not referred to anywhere in the document. It's not referred to in the list of exceptions, because there are exceptions to single-sex accommodation like casualty and intensive care and things like that. But tucked away at the back, you've got this. Trans people should be accommodated according to their presentation, the way they dress, and the name and pronouns they currently use. This may not always accord with the physical sex appearance of the chest or genitalia. It does not depend on their having a gender recognition certificate or a legal name change, and it applies to toilet and bathing facilities, except, for instance, that pre-operative trans people should not share open shower facilities. There are a few other bits and pieces, but if you look at that, it's very difficult for anyone on the ward. I don't know how anyone on the ward would administer this, because someone born male, who looks male, wears male clothes, has a male name, has male genitals, is legally male. He just has to say, I am a woman, and he can officially enter any women's single-sex space. So, I think it was finding out some of these things. And then also, initially, we just looked at the Scottish trusts, and we got a couple of articles in the Telegraph in Scotland, and all the comments underneath were, well, it's just Scotland, it's, they're a crazy place. And it was just disbelief. And it was that point we sort of thought, we're going to have to get the results for the whole country, because until you actually show people what's happening, they just don't believe you. And that's why the map is great. You just click, click, click. And it's like, oh, right, there's no denying it anymore.
I love that. Yeah, don't let yourself be disproven. It's interesting the way it's hidden so stealthily. It's almost like an admission of guilt that they know that what they're saying is out with the law. Why are they so persistent about this?
I mean, I think, it's come from the top down. It didn't start in the NHS. Well, that was one of the things we did find. I suppose we'll talk about the results, some of the other results later. But one of the things that came out was a sort of timeline, because we just couldn't understand, where is this coming from? Why is this so strong? And there are a couple of different factors. Obviously, there's the Gender Recognition Act, and this is obviously 10 years before same-sex marriage. It's a different time. And I think probably the stealth initially was to protect a very small number of people who'd gone to extreme lengths to change their bodies, modify their bodies to live in the opposite gender. So I think initially the stealth comes from that. Why it continues, I don't know. I mean, it's very difficult subject matter. So politically, it's not a great vote winner. My impression of not at all being in the healthcare sector was that there probably was a policy fudge. For a really long time, it was a really small number of people.
Mary, what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, these are my own personal thoughts, but, I think there's been a massive failure within the NHS in the sense of leadership, and there's been too much allowance of activists to write the policies. Now, we have really experienced HR people, directors of nursing for safeguarding, etc., all of those things that should know what end result could be of not protecting single-sex spaces. Safeguarding should be first and foremost. From some of the work that Fiona and her team have done, you see from the equality impact assessments, if they ever were done, they were done so poorly. It's been a massive, massive failure. And, it's really hard to understand how that has been allowed to happen, and then to be pushing against that and still it not changing. One of the biggest excuses that's used at the moment is, well, as probably, I don't know if we've discussed it yet, the Annex B that was in the NHS England document, which literally nearly all the trusts in England were copying and pasting. They just follow that like it's the law. And then if you raise that issue locally within your own organisation, they'll say they're waiting for NHS England to update that. Then NHS England will say they're waiting for the EHRC guidance before they do anything. It's continually passing the buck, and, that's not how leadership should be done. The independent organisations, the NHS trusts, hold legal responsibility for every member of staff within it and every patient that comes in it. So they are legally obliged to follow the law. And as has been said several times by legal people, by Keir Starmer, by Wes Streeting, even by Bridget Phillipson, is that they should not be waiting for the EHRC guidance to come through anyway. They should be seeking their own legal advice, and they should be getting on with changing those policies. Obviously, it would help if the EHRC guidance was agreed, but I think it has been, very upsetting.
Scene in Health were looking to do something similar to this piece of work when Fiona very helpfully provided this all to you. What are the sort of main aims and concerns of Scene in Health at the moment? What's on the radar right now?
Okay, so what we specifically went out and commissioned under the Scene in Health Network was to understand the impact of not implementing the Supreme Court judgment on NHS staff. So the headlines to that were that 94.3% report that unlawful self-identification policies remain in place. 83.5% report no interim arrangements have been put into place for single-sex spaces. 77% report reduced confidence in their employer to follow the law or to uphold their legal rights. 67% do not feel comfortable raising concerns about non-implementation of the Supreme Court judgment. There were comments such as, I am still forced to share a changing room with a male colleague. That's even after Sandy Peggy and the Darlington nurses cases. When the Supreme Court judgment came out, only 46.6% report receiving any communication about that. With only 4% of staff received communication that clarified workforce implication. Very, very biased still towards trans activists in the sense of wanting to appease them and not wanting to actually, accept that this has actually been quite a big deal for a lot of women and what their rights are. One comment was it was all pitched as though only trans individuals were affected rather than the 80% of the workforce that are female. Communication did not recognise the current unlawful policies, nor did it include an apology to women who have been discriminated against as a result. And we must be clear that they have been discriminated against.
It's discrimination on a huge scale. Unless you've got the finances to opt out of the NHS, we're talking like discrimination on a whole population basis. It's huge. It's really huge. Just from the outside, it just looks like complete and utter institutional sexism.
It is. It is a complete blindness. And, I think one of the most devastating parts of this is understanding that from a female perspective, it is probably one of the, if not the most vulnerable situations you will be in if you are an unwell patient in an acute ward. How vulnerable you will be. You don't have a voice then. And we really do need to be the people to speak up on behalf of those people and on behalf of any of the staff. For instance, still somebody getting changed in front of a male colleague. Many, many women we know are, they can't lose their jobs. Often are breadwinners for their families. There's lots of people that can't talk up about this for the risk. And that was actually one of the comments that came through, that they're still scared to say anything. It's shocking. We're no further on. I think it's really disappointing that we're no further on following that Supreme Court judgment clarification.
This is a very scary picture to be painting of the situation in the NHS 1 year on from that ruling. And it's so hostile to women. I think what I'll do now is I will pass over to Jane to look more into the audit and its findings with you.
It's very disappointing in a way, some of the things you've been saying there. We spend a lot of time, don't we, saying that we think the tide is turning and we think things are getting better and so on. But there is so much to do. There's so much to do. So we're very grateful for what you've managed to do between you. So I want to find out a little bit about this audit. I'm an organisational person. I like things that are nice and tidily organised. So about it, how did you start? What was your thinking?
Well, it had to be all online. I mean, this sort of just came about, as I say, on this thread where people were watching the live stream. I mean, who watches live streams of employment tribunals? Well, apparently I do
All of
now.
us.
Fascinating. I feel guilty at the entertainment value here because it's awful, awful stuff. But so grateful to the people who persist with them. So as part of this discussion, I'd been through this terrible process. My worldview had gone upside down and I'm feeling very queasy. So it had to be anonymous. I mean, I'm self-employed, I've got a mortgage to pay, and like other people, we weren't in a position that we could all kind of band together and come forward. You can't I couldn't sit back and watch our champion, Naomi Cunningham, battling away, tribunal by tribunal on our behalf. So it had to be anonymous, it had to be online, and it was slightly like a kind of turfy Wikipedia idea, the idea that you could crowdsource information. You can do a lot from your sofa, and it's literally an admin job. It is just seeking out this paperwork, reading it, trying to understand it. So how do you gather it then and into a sort of a coherent picture and not having a clue what I was doing? All I knew really was I'll just get a free account for an online forum and people can enter the data. So I set up this online forum account and I would send out the link by private message to the people who volunteered. And there was a way of quarantining the threads behind the scenes. Anyone who's done the audit will now be showing my workings behind the curtain. So there was a way of sort of checking that people was in good standing, really. We would put a list. We took it region by region. So Scotland was the first one, and then we went to London, figuring that would be good because it's obviously near power and a lot of the press. So there's sort of a lot more people there, aren't there? Quite frankly, so more likely to generate more interest. And so we took about 30 trusts, put them all on a big list of them all on the thread, and people started volunteering. I'll take this too, or they take 2 or 3. It takes them about an hour, maybe 2 hours per trust. So it's a lot of time.
How did you find your volunteers?
Well, initially we set up a separate thread. I said, look, anyone who wants to come and join. This is on Mumsnet, yeah. And I said, anyone who wants to come and join me on this other thread, come on over. And we just called it like a working party, a working group. And so we kind of organised ourselves administratively through that. And that's where I sort of posted the lists of trusts. And you could see as people entered in the back end of the forum, it's a big sort of spreadsheet. And you could see as they were completed, so you could score them off and post updates on the thread. And it was sort of, we called it thread wrangling. You had to kind of keep track of who was doing what. And, if people fell behind or something came up, because, stuff happens, somebody else would take over. And you just work through the region. And initially I was reading everything, especially for London, trying to work out how we were going to organise this data. And I'd sort of decided we'd put it into a giant table. So on the 3 columns, the trust name, the patient policies, and then the staff policies. And we just filled in all the boxes. And there were instructions on the form. Because having done a few of them, we had to keep tweaking the form because different things would come up. And interestingly, different regions had different features. There was a lot of cutting and pasting going on, so you get these themes that would appear. But on the forum, there were instructions about what we were looking for, what to record, where to go on the trust websites, the terms to use to search. Is it mixed sex accommodation, single sex accommodation, that sort of thing? Getting copies of those web pages, copying the URL, taking PDFs and uploading them into the forum. So it's really, it's very sort of meticulous stuff. Things like, did they record all 9 protected characteristics? The same as the Equality Act. Well, that was pretty rare. And did they do an equality impact assessment? Did they have a copy? And what did it say? Did they bother with a consultation? So trying to just check that everything they're supposed to do was there. And then there's this massive, as I say, spreadsheet, which we got changed into tables. And I think overall we had about 40 volunteers. Someone called them the Fabulous 40, which was wonderful. And then over time, as I had to kind of follow the information through, because eventually we'd get these tables, and then I'd be trying to get stories to the press or to get the word out. Other volunteers who'd done a lot of it, they would start with the thread wrangling, and then they would move into the back and they'd be looking at the spreadsheets and be able to see, and then they would take on trying to distill. So we spread it out. But I mean, if it wasn't for those 6, that group of 6, we just, totally brilliant, persistence. There were lots of issues to overcome. It was interesting as we went through just the different problems popped up, and we had to kind of tackle.
Mary, when whilst Fiona was doing this and Seen in Health was sort of involved as a partner, were you able to help with like the press stories and that sort of thing? So presumably your network had a little more experience of that sort of side, did it?
I mean, we still haven't had a lot of press activity, if I'm honest. We're hoping to get more as we speak about it more. We've had Fiona, you actually had an article published, didn't you, in the Daily Telegraph, I think.
We had lots early on. I mean, that was part of the issue. As the audit got bigger, there were more stories, more information. It became actually really unwieldy. It was like sort of indigestible. We had all this proof. Who really is a journalist or a regular person is going to have time to pick through 300 folders with loads of PDFs, hundreds of pages of evidence, but it's just not accessible. So as time went on, we got lots of good stories through to about June last year, and a big thing around Christmas. But then after that, it was just really difficult. So that's why we went for the map, because it just means that anyone can look.
So tell us about the map, and tell us about what you can find out. If I was looking on the map, what would I be able to find out?
Well, what we've done is we obviously have each trust had an address. So we based it on postcode, and we got the trust name, and there's a little map pin for each trust. And when you click on that pin, up pops a dialogue box, and you will see the things that we wanted to show. So there's the contact details. We thought you might want to get in touch with them to talk to them about this. There's the link to the website for the trust. We when we converted this, obviously we've got all the PDFs and things, but because it's web-based, we had to link to archive sites. So it can be very slow. So apologies to people who are finding this a bit painful when they click on the map. That it goes off to an archive copy of the trust's website where they were at the time saying they were offering single-sex accommodation, because that's one of the things we wanted to show. On the public-facing site, they're showing you this single-sex accommodation, and they're telling you how they're going to do it, and they send in monthly reports to the National Centre. I think you get fined if you don't do it, and things like that. We wanted to show what they were saying in the hidden away policy, the policy that's not public-facing, that you have to get, that we got through freedom of information searches. Well, they weren't our freedom of information searches, actually. We're working with Seen, but actually we benefited from the work of a completely separate woman in East Anglia. I think she's mentioned in your programme about education, actually, because she's the queen of freedom of information searches. I think she's got a pro account, Irma Namies, and we picked up her work, and we wouldn't have got anywhere if it hadn't been for her.
She knows everything there is to know about doing an FOI, I think, doesn't she?
She certainly does. And so we were able to pick up on her work, and we were just cataloguing it, really, because the freedom of information searches are a whole job in themselves. So there's a link to the policy on the freedom of information search frequently that she's done. And then, but that might be 30, 40, 50 pages long, and most people don't really have the time. And it's also this absolutely garbled language. So even if you read it, you can think, oh, it's all fine. I don't know what they're talking about. So we would lift out a key quote, and there's always a key quote that you can look at. So you don't have to go delving through all of this. But if you are of that sort of mind, you can. So it'll give you a key quote to show that it is a gender self-identification policy in your area. And then we also have links. This is where we ran into some trouble, actually, because staff policies are really hard to get hold of. We know from NHS 5 they didn't write anything down. it wasn't a policy, it was practice. They didn't have live policy. So it's sort of even worse. You don't know what the rules are. And so we had to think, how are we going to explain what the situation is? And the only thing I could think of was what contact had a trust had with a diversity, equality and inclusion scheme, DEI. So that would be Stonewall Workplace Equality Index, I think it is, Stonewall Champions, NHS badges. Stonewall was the big one. We've seen trust documents where they were being scored and being given advice on how to get higher scores. It's sort of like a pyramid scheme where you pay this organisation to mark your own homework. But there's a scoring system, and the more items the trust can check off, the higher they go. So it just was perfect for terminating any sort of critical thinking. You had a perfect combination. You could feel virtuous because you were helping a minority. You could get a dopamine hit because you're scoring points, and you could compete against your neighbouring trusts. I mean, what's not to like? It was wonderful. It absolutely ruined all sorts of policies and the paperwork. So we didn't have real evidence, but the baseline requirement for getting into one of these schemes is that you have gender self-ID for staff.
Yeah. Mary, this policy findings, do they match what your scene members had already spotted and commented on inside your group?
Absolutely. I mean, it was really powerful to see their report, to envision it at such a scale, because, even with Seen in Health, from our perspective, it's still a difficult group for staff to join, because if you were out as a Seen in Health member, that again outs you as having these certain gender critical views, doesn't it? So it makes it quite difficult from that point of view, being a member of Seen in Health, or certainly being out as a member of Seen in Health. But yes, obviously we've just redone the survey, and some of those comments, I would say, so these are some of the comments that they've said. I feel very unwelcome as a woman who does not want to be forced to lie to keep my job or have to navigate a system that erases females. I find it immensely distressing to work within an organisation that promotes this ideology that impacts my ability to do work well. Rather concerning was the outcomes that they felt due to that non-implementation, which was staff describing concerns about inaccurate or unreliable data affecting care, lack of clarity in care pathways, safeguarding risks. They report reduced morale and disengagement, staff leaving or considering leaving their roles, difficulty carrying out their roles effectively. And very much a governance risk was one of the ones that was coming up, about a lack of clear accountability, continued unlawful practices, lack of urgency, absence of corrective action. So those are the feelings that are coming through. They also describe the public sector equality duty. Staff describe a lack of balanced consideration of protected characteristics in organisational decision making, which we know has been very much the case.
Yeah. I mean, it's so rare to see disability, for example, mentioned, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Where do you think that's come from, Mary? That
muddle. What I will say is I didn't see that. I was very much skimming for things when I was looking through some of the policies for certain statements that I could use. But what I would say is you could see, like, if you looked in Wales or you looked in Scotland, they had one activist group that had written a document that had been given over, which would be trans at work. If somebody's transing at work, this is the guidance, and they all lifted from that guidance. So this was completely written by an activist group, be it Stonewall, be it another one, and then that was used just verbatim. And what will they say? They'll say something like, it's not policy, it's guidance. That's one of the things that they say. Oh, actually, that's not a policy. That's a guidance. That's how they try and get round that, that's what it would be good for you to do, but we're not actually, that's not a policy. So that's not a lawful
or good practice. I've heard that said before. Good practice.
That's another euphemism for it. Yeah. So they do that kind of obfuscation of what word they use to describe the document, and those things we've seen. You can just tell, and who's responsible. I mean, from the point of view of staff, patient safety, single sex accommodation, that has a very clinical head that signs that off. It is usually the Director of Nursing, who is usually the lead for safeguarding.
And that is something they have to report on, isn't it?
Yes, so they have to report on that. Yeah, absolutely.
So are they reporting, when they report their single sex, because I believe you report in terms of how many times you've broken, you've breached, you've breached the single sex guidance. Is that right? So are they?
So yeah, they should be reporting on that monthly.
Yeah,
at board level.
And are they announcing the trans women as a breach?
I don't know.
No, they don't. It's part of the exception. They're outside the numbers. They're counted as women in women's accommodation or men in men's accommodation, but I don't suppose there's so many of them.
So again, we've got this situation where we don't really know what the data, we don't know what harms have been done or what the data is. Can you just sum up for us some of the key findings, Fiona?
Well, I mean, yes, the NHS constitution promises and things. There's no evidence of any protected single-sex spaces anywhere in the UK. That's coming from the top down, and then we've proved it bottom up. Not everywhere, something like 3% of trusts didn't have patient policies or something, but because of this top-down policy, you're looking for phrases where someone says, we judge it on biological sex. And basically nobody said that. No, in fact, that would be considered hate speech in some of the policies. If you mentioned the word man, you'd be re-educated, you'd be told it wasn't a man, or you'd have your own treatment withdrawn. So it's really dicey to be pointing out biological reality on the ward, it seemed.
Just on that point, can I give you a quote? Because I really wanted to share that today, and it's resonant to what you're saying. There was a question in one of the documents that said, what if a patient, carer, relative or visitor objects to someone who they believe to be trans being on a ward or their identified gender? And the answer was in this document, if a patient who is trans wants to be in a single-sexed environment of the gender they identify with, this right supersedes objections raised by other patients, their relatives or carers. If other patients, their relatives or carers articulate inappropriate views and objections, they are clearly related to a service user's trans identity, then this should be challenged to ensure that the trans service user is effectively supported by trust staff. I've seen other examples when they've said that patient should be moved while the trans patient stays there.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of them.
Goodness gracious.
That was used in many documents.
I mean, the assumption is, isn't it, that the general population includes an awful lot of bigots who may say the wrong thing.
Well, I suppose, unfortunately, none of us got the memo. You know what I mean? Like, the vast majority of the country still think these words mean one thing, and then everyone else who's had the training thinks that they're ahead of us somehow, and they believe this language to be meaning something else. So that was one of the reasons, really, for wanting to get all these policies out in the open, because there's a massive gulf, and somehow we've got to talk about it and sort it out. It's a terrible mess.
So you've got your map, and you've also pulled together some of the main points into a report, haven't you? So where can we find those?
We haven't got the report itself, I think, on the website, but on the website you've got the map. You can find the links and everything for each trust geographically. There's a timeline on there with all of the information that we've dug up about how things have come to be. I suppose we've given some instructions on how to interpret some of the things if you want to get into the policy. But one of the things maybe that people could look at are links to the equality impact assessments. They're really telling, those in particular. We didn't find any that were fit for purpose. They just seemed to change the bits of the Equality Act that they didn't like.
I bet you didn't find many anyway, did you?
We found a few, but there was a good number that were just missing. And then there were a lot that were tacked on, and they had lots missing inside them. Usually any effect, none. But what they were measuring against, they didn't manage to cut and paste the 9 protected characteristics. I mean, this is the only purpose of the equality impact assessment. You get the 9 protected characteristics, and you check that they don't interfere with each other with what you're planning to do. And they always said there was no effect. clearly there are interactions with sexual orientation, sex and religion. So, there should automatically be something a bit more in those boxes. Frequently it was none. But the worst bit really was that it's too often this was happening for it to be a mistake. Sex was removed and it was replaced with gender, because that changes the meaning of everything. The worst one I saw was sex was removed and it was replaced with gender and gender reassignment. Well, I mean, that as a category, that's everyone, isn't it?
Yeah.
What a useless definition. You remove sex and you've basically you've erased men and women as categories. You don't have to talk about that anymore. They're sort of inconvenient, aren't they?
So you can find the map. This is on the Scene in Health website, is it?
It is. It's on sceneinhealth.org. And if you look for NHS Audit map, you can access it there and you'll see the map. But also there's 2 links where you can actually write to your MP and write to your local CEO. There's a letter all ready to go. So that's an action really for people to be able to use that information and contact those local NHS organisations and their local MP.
And presumably as well, if other citizen journalists want to carry on the work, they can perhaps try and get their local newspapers involved with local hospital.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, one of the other things we wanted to do for the release of this map and for the 1-year anniversary of the Supreme Court ruling was because all the policies are from July 2024 to July 2025. And there's an obvious accusation, which is, it's all out of date. I mean, we'd hoped it'll be all out of date after the Supreme Court ruling. And we decided we better keep going with all these tribunals that were being pursued by the NHS. They obviously weren't giving up. So we kept going because we wanted the ability to say, you can't deny it. This has happened. So we took a sample of 40 because we actually thought we wouldn't find any updated ones at all. But it was quite interesting, the range of replies that we got. So we spread them all across the country. NHS 5 still don't write anything down. That's the first finding. They didn't have a policy last year and they still don't have a policy this year. So plausible deniability for them, that's what they're going for. 19 out of 26, that's nearly 3/4. They made no change at all. No change. So we know it was unlawful last year. No change. And they're waiting for guidance or it's not due for review. And some of them were not due for review until 2028. I'm laughing, it's not funny. And then I would say 2 of those trusts stood out. I won't name and shame them, but 2 of them, within 2 weeks or 3 weeks of the Supreme Court ruling, took the old policy and re-ratified it and pumped it straight back out again.
My goodness.
So they didn't even bother making any changes. It was fine as it was. No, it wasn't. And they're waiting for guidance. And then, I've no idea why they're waiting. Workplace regulations that cover the staff, that's all clear. And actually, the Equality Act, if you do a search on it, it mentions hospital and healthcare. You don't have to prove your exceptions like other services do. It's actually listed and you can search it up, word search it. But if they're listening, paragraphs 215, 217 and 265X in the Supreme Court judgment, they just have to look at those and that will tell them what to do. It's biological sex. It's not anything else. So we got one. We found one who has sent a new policy. So last year, I will name them. It's West London Mental Health Trust. And they've said they've updated their policy in line with Supreme Court judgment. So I was really excited and thinking, it's the first one. So it's going to be a template. We know that the NHS really love to cut and paste. So this is going viral if it's good. And unfortunately, they've based their admissions. So last year, it was gender self-ID. This year, they are saying their admissions are all based on legal gender. Okay, so let that sink in. So if you were looking at a female ward, legal gender mean a female with a birth certificate that says female, born, sex at birth, minus females with a gender recognition certificate, plus males with a gender recognition certificate. Sound familiar? This is
Yeah.
certified sex, which we all thought was chucked out with the Supreme Court ruling.
So one trust has rewritten its policies and they've done it wrong. So Mary,
Yeah.
I could see you had something to add at one point there.
Yeah, there was a couple of hospitals that I saw through the audit that had said that they were not going to house people by gender, but what they were going to do was put them in single occupancy rooms, so treat it on a individual basis where they would be placed in a single room. Now, that might seem like the best end result, except for obviously those rooms are needed. They're not just rooms that are very free. There's not many of them.
Infection control, isn't it?
Infection control, immunocompromised people, and from my experience, dying people as well, that you like to give a bit of privacy to. That's quite rare that you can even get it for that, to be honest, Jane. So, you know, I think there's an idea that, you know, we don't care what happens to trans people. We certainly do. This is also about protecting women that identify as men. I mean, you may have seen it or you may not have seen it, but there was a woman who identified as a man that was raped on a mental health ward by two males. You know, there are limitations to identifying as a member of the opposite sex, I'm afraid. And that has been our problem all along, is not accepting that there are limitations to that.
We have to take our hat off to you. This is a huge piece of work and it's a wonderful collaboration. Really, congratulations to everyone that's been involved. And it's a bit of an encouragement to those of us who sometimes send off that email or do an FOI. I'm going to pass across to Bex because I know she's got your very last question for you.
I have. So we finish with the same question in every episode, and that is, do you have a woman or women of the moment?
I'll go first if you want. So I'm going to say Lily Craven, who is, you might know as the Atta Girls on X, who writes the Women of the Day post. She's also one of the Women of Wessex coordinators. And say, just because that was my first introduction really to start being part of a group that was more, you know, part of activism and things like that, that she is such a really good role model, a really natural leader and mentor, and really kind of embodies all the values of kind of sisterhood. And I think her Women of the Day posts really keep women positive and aspirational and keep them on track when it can feel like a long, hard slog to get anything changed. So it helps me to actually, you know, keep focused.
Lovely pick. And Fiona?
I'm going to cheekily say two, because there are two women without whom this map wouldn't exist at all. The obvious one is Sandy Peggy. She is responsible for me finding out about all of this. She sort of snagged a tripwire at work, didn't she? She didn't know really what she was getting into, and she's been so strong to go forward. If it'd been me, I think I would have shuffled off and just been terrified into silence. So she's amazing, and we all owe her a great debt. And the second person is Justine Roberts of Mumsnet, because I don't know what it's cost her personally to keep a place for free speech where women can find each other and talk about things, because if it wasn't for that, I think this would be completely invisible. And so a big thank you to her. And then obviously all the women on the audit.
Amazing. Absolutely. Well done to all of those women. And if you, our listeners, are wanting to look at the audit map, you can find it on seeninhealth.org under the NHS audit map link. Perfect. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to our listeners. We really hope that you've enjoyed this episode. And if you have, please do like, share, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff to help keep our channel growing and spread the word. Thank you.